Hi everybody, it's me, the Fetch, host of Inside the Eye Live. Before the Sunday mainstream media political pundit talk shows, there's Inside the Eye Live, where we break down some of the weekly mainstream media talking points before the talking points even get aired. Add in some entertaining stories, weather, cats, intriguing and informative guests, and you get one of the most listened to Saturday morning streaming media political talk shows going today. And it's all right here on our flagship station, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. So join me, The Fetch, for Inside the Eye Live every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern. It is truly intelligent media for the politically aware.
Welcome to Sacred Matrix, a divine paradigm of love and universal consciousness, with your host, Janet Kira Lessin and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Together, we transform the world.
And now, here are your hosts, Janet Kira and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
With my co-host, Dr. Sasha Lessin. And today our very special guest is Dan-Willis. And Dan is one of the Disclosure Project's top secret military witnesses that testified at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. in 2001 in front of every major media. A world disclosure event which was asking for a congressional hearing in order to bring forth the witness scientists within the Black projects who can release the technologies that have been hidden for over 60 years that could further stop damage to our planet. But instead, the message was sanitized by controlled media, mainstream media, and the next radio broadcast engineer at ABC Newsman, Dan, has taken a keen interest in how and why the mainstream media has withheld disclosure of the full message to the public, a message based on hundreds of credible military and intelligence witness testimonies. And today we're going to catch up with Dan. We last talked to him in December 2014. We're going to talk about UFO current events and how the aliens are in control. And recently we had Clinton and Obama. We talked about Roswell, Area 51, and aliens on Jimmy Kimmel. Are they trying to tell us something? So we're going to talk about that and many more things. Dr. Lessin, what would you like to say before we bring on Dan?
Well, obviously, Dan-Willis is one of the people that is trying to break open the secrets of the Illuminati that control everything, the Warburg elite cartel. And it's underneath the disclosure that would come with the extraterrestrial presence and the withholding of the energy, free energy that could be ours so easily in the medical benefits, is the cover-up of mass murders, including our citizens in the Twin Tower attacks. And that were a result of our planning and stand down by the minions of this very cartel. And this is very important kind of information, and I beg you to listen to it very carefully. We're so glad to have you back, Dan.
Hi, Dan. Welcome back to the show.
My pleasure. Good to be with all of you. I think it's important we talk about these things. I think truth is important for the future of humanity on this planet.
So, what's the latest? I talked to you briefly on the phone earlier today, and you said that there are some things that we should talk about. The latest updates. And the webmatrix.net. It's the webmatrix.net, which is Dan's site. If the listeners or people in the chat want to follow along a little bit about some of this information. Go ahead, Dan.
I just want to say that article that's on the webmatrix.net, I wouldn't have written it except a a media company out of Hollywood, wanted me to write an article on media control because I used to be, an ABC newsman, and had a number of experiences firsthand with media, sanitizing out the information before reaching the public. Like, for example, CBS interviewed me, and I said, look, I'm not doing this interview unless I can say that we have the scientists willing to go forth and open congressional hearing that can prove we don't need nuclear, we don't need oil, we don't need coal. They promised up and down, but the director of the show was in tears. I know I promised. The higher executives made me cut that out. And we know the higher executives, who they are. Basically, the CIA owns everybody in the mainstream media, and they have what's called non-official cover for their journalists. So basically, they create a perception matrix that the people that are born into this matrix of perception on this world, they're not getting the full picture of what's going on. And I think. I think it's criminal, myself, that
I do too. Yes.
The entire planet, that here we had anti-gravity. We haven't needed oil or all these technologies, since the 1940s and 50s. While the small elite group that feels they're entitled to be the rulers over humanity have created this breakaway civilizations with technologies that the average person would look at and say, my God, this is science fiction. This is such a beautiful planet, and people could all work together, without the trillions of dollars going into the industrial military complex and continued enemies being created, and the psychological operations being done on the mainstream media of the engineering of consent that they were doing even starting, back in the 30s. So,
isn't that the point of it? Is they create these artificial separations so they can have us continually in a state of war?
That seems to be all the top secret documents and whistleblowers are all basically saying that, Janet. Yes.
Mm-hmm. So if we look at it from that point, they give us foods that are all toxic for us. Everything is food. They're proving it with their American Medical Association and whatever they're doing to create medicines for foods, and they're all toxic. They're poisons, and they slowly poison us. So nobody, can live to be 120. I don't know anybody's 120. That's supposed to be our life expectancy. They gave us in the Bible, so to speak. But we're dying somewhere between 40 and 90 for the most part.
Well, look at the corporations that are controlled. And the pharmaceuticals industry is one of the big ones, and the textbooks for our doctors, they only get less than 24 or 25 hours in nutrition in the 4-year interim of learning to heal and take care of people. It basically become like pimps for the pharmaceutical industries and selling the pills. And I've seen what it costs, like 0.00001 cent for a pill, and they charge $20 a pill. So it's a huge profit-making industry that's driven by profit. My mom was diagnosed for cancer. The doctor wanted to remove her eye and half her face. And I said, well, let's think about a different alternative. So I did some research, and this German nutritionalist, Max Gerson, had a therapy that was based on nutritional therapy. Essentially, you starve the cancer, and you build the body, and you help the elimination. I stayed with my mother. You had to go across the border from California into Mexico, down on the beach area down there. They had a 13-story hospital. I put a computer network in exchange for my mom's bill, and what they do is they give you, fresh pressed carrot juice, organic food, certain diet, and things. She came out of there. The doctor looked at her. They diagnosed her up and down. They couldn't find a trace of cancer anywhere in her, and it's kind of interesting. Max Gerson, his daughter, who I know personally, she told me that when he came out with his book, A Cure for Cancer, he got strychnine poisoning, but he was able to heal himself. But once the book finally got released, he got a heavier dose of strychnine poisoning. This time it killed him. This is from his daughter. She was telling me. And guess what? The American Cancer Society published his death. Guess what they said he died from?
Cancer.
Cancer, right, exactly.
Yeah.
So, I've seen
part of the whole thing that if somebody's going to undermine their authority by creating a cure for cancer, or some kind of alternative power system, or come out and reveal that aliens are real and they're walking among us, they can get targeted and killed by diseases, heart attacks. And how did they give them the strychnine? Do you know?
I don't know. I don't know how that happened, but they make it anything that's not drugs, surgery, or chemotherapy with radiation, which is pretty damaging in itself, is illegal. Only that is acceptable. The whole health industry. I don't mean to go off on a tangent from aliens and everything, but
that's okay. It's perfect.
The whole health industry should be not a situation that's driven by profit. In other words, keeping people in a debilitated, half vegetative, alive state. With all the things they do to our food and everything else, in the water. Fluoride in our water, GMOs in our food, and whatever else. It all is not a healthy condition for people on this planet. But
right.
It isn't just medicines or the pseudo medicines, but it's also the control of nutrition with things like Monsanto, which is making natural food illegal and having only their type of grains available and making everything else illegal the whole world over.
Yeah, it's total insanity. It's complete insanity. And there is an agenda. Besides being insane, there's an agenda behind the whole thing.
Right. That's what we need to look at. It's not insane from their perspective. They're doing this on purpose.
What do they get out of it?
So tell us more about the agenda.
Yeah, it's all about the agenda. Everything you see on the mainstream television, every perception, everything they try to sell you on, or in your engineering of consent, is basically supports an agenda. That's why the CIA is tied into the Tavistock Institute. That's why billions of dollars go into thousands of think tanks that carefully engineer what you see on the television in order to engineer consent that's in support of the objectives of the agenda of the cabal, I guess is the best name to call them. They go by a lot of different names.
So, planetary oligarchy.
The planetary oligarchy. Have you been able to track down who is the cabal? Like, are they extraterrestrial? Are they human? Are they Homo capensis? Or are they reptilians? Any ideas?
Well, it's with secret societies, of which John F. Kennedy warned us about, and the dangers of secrecy, as many people have warned us about. They, because they're a secret society, it's hard to tell, not unless you get into one. Now, I've been involved in a secret society myself, but it's benevolent. I've been in the Rosicrucian Order since 1976. Not that I'm into anything in particular. I'm very universal. I like looking at all pieces of information to see what makes sense, what resonates intuitively. I'm going up into the higher degrees, and I have not seen anything that's not benevolent. But, some believe that, if you look through history, you see all the people who are, Freemasons, Knights of Malta, Skull and Bones, all these different societies. And you look at the history, if you go back and find that, Rothschilds basically wrote up the plan for the Illuminati, which was infiltrated back in 1776 by Adam Weishaupt. And they basically said they were going to use the Freemasons because it gave them a perfect cover, because people didn't expect anything. You know, on the front, it looks like, and don't get me wrong, there's millions of very good people that are Freemasons. But on the front, it's like, you know, make good men better. But once you get up into the higher degrees, the highest you can go on your own is like the 32nd degree. Interestingly enough, I'm still trying to research this. My grandfather died in Argentina. He was a 33rd degree Freemason, and his father was a 32nd degree, you know, in the Scottish Rite. And I'm trying to find out information about my mysterious family background. But the 33rd.
Same thing. I have Masons on both sides, and my grandfather and my father's side was a 33-degree Mason, and my family, you know, now that we know, we're trying to crack it down, but it's really, you know, it's been difficult. But go ahead, back to you.
That's right. I remember that. I remember you telling me that. Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of them. You know, there's a lot of Freemasons out there, but only you have to be. There's nothing you can do on your own to get to the 33rd degree. You have to be selected. It's an honorary degree. And if you look at the people through history, you know, when this media company wanted me to write an article, I'm not a UFOologist. I'm like new at this. I'm only a witness, okay? I'm not a historian either, but, you know, I dug into the books, you know, looked at reputable sources, you know, Jim Moore's, Professor Quigley, Joseph P. Farrell, Richard Dolan, you know, there's several of them. I had to dig in, but I became fascinated to try to answer this question that this company in Hollywood wanted me to write this article about who controls the mainstream media and why do they fear disclosing the truth about the extraterrestrial reality. And so I had to research for my own education. And what I found going back, I went back a little bit back to the beginning of the Rothschilds' involvement into the Freemasons, because it naturally extended into that. But going back to the very beginning of the 20th century, back about 1900 forward, I started looking at all the players, all the presidents that were involved that are Freemasons, all the people that were Knights of Malta and in certain positions. Even Heinrich Himmler was a Knight of Malta. It's kind of interesting. And if you look through history, you start to see that there is somehow an interconnecting between these secret societies that we mentioned, and what seemed to happen was that they infiltrated the Freemasons, and that gave them a cover in order to conduct their operations. And the inner circle doesn't know. The outer circle doesn't know what the inner circle is doing, and the way it's set up is like a pyramidal chain of command, so to speak, like in the military, where the higher ups know what's going on, the lowers don't know, and they can be taken orders. The lower level Masons are given orders by the higher level Masons. So it's like a military operation in a way. So what happened was, you hear the names Rockefeller, you hear the names J.P. Morgan, Rothschilds, all the different names that you keep popping up everywhere. And Rockefeller, Nelson Rockefeller, during Eisenhower era, basically paid for Eisenhower's campaign. And so they had a situation where they had the MJ-12 operations, which was set up originally with Truman, and that was under the control of the President of the United States at that point. But they wanted to have a buffer, an isolation from these, so there was no congressional oversight, no presidential control, nobody in our legal constitutional government to have any jurisdiction. So this new MJ-12 operation, which he set up, under a secret executive order, which put Alan Dulles, a 33rd degree Freemason, as MJ1, with all the members of the cabal basically controlling the extraterrestrial issue. One of the disclosure witnesses, General Lovekin, talked about that. I've got a real quick 30-second clip I can play if you'd like.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
That
do.
sounds good.
What he was on, General Lovekin was on Eisenhower's staff, and what happened was Eisenhower was really frustrated because when he let Nelson Rockefeller restructure it, it basically took our legal constitutional government out of the loop. And here's his testimony.
But what happened was Eisenhower got sold out. I think that he realized that all of a sudden this matter is going into the control of corporations. He realized that he was losing control. He realized that the phenomenon of whatever it was that we were faced with was not going to be in the best hands, and those were as far as I can remember, that was the expression that was used. It's not going to be in the best hands. And so it has turned out to be.
And so it has turned out to be. So recently, not really that recent, back in 2005, relatively speaking anyway, Richard Dolan interviewed one of the two CIA agents that was on camera telling about, here you have the president very frustrated that what they did was the CIA basically controls Area 51, which they set up back in 1955. But he tried to look into it, but, they said, I'm sorry, Mr. President, you don't have any jurisdiction. And he said, well, I'm going to come out there with the army out of Colorado and tear this place apart if I don't get some answers what's going on. So he sent these two CIA agents, and they saw the advanced craft, they saw the extraterrestrial vehicles, they even apparently interviewed one of the extraterrestrials that were there and came back. So what happened was, at the end of the Eisenhower administration, everybody's familiar with the famous warning speech that he gave about, the misplaced powers of the industrial military complex, and only an alert, knowledgeable citizenry can protect our future liberties and freedoms. So, see, Kennedy was already well aware of the extraterrestrial issue way back during the 1942 because he was in the Office of Naval Intelligence. You remember the War of L.A. with the searchlights in 1942? Well, they apparently shot down a craft, and it was a top secret document that was, during the Roosevelt administration, that they decided to create this, what they call the Interplanetary Phenomena Unit. And so these top secret documents Kennedy was well aware of. And when we won the war with Germany, not the Nazis, all the Nazis escaped. But when we won the war with Germany, and they had the Potsdam, if that's the right way to pronounce it, the conference where they had Churchill, Stalin, Potsdam, that's it, okay. Churchill, Stalin, and Truman, all three of them, by the way, happen to be 33rd degree Freemasons to determine how to punish Germany. Anyway, Kennedy went over with James Forrestal, who was the Secretary of Navy, to review the Nazi technologies that were derived from extraterrestrial craft, and they were shocked at what they saw because the technology was light years beyond anything they had. And that sort of was the part of the drive between getting the Project Paperclip and bringing all the Nazi scientists in, of which their top scientists didn't come over and with NASA and everything. So Kennedy was well aware of that, and James Forrestal, who was one of the original MJ-12 members, had an attitude of wanting to release this, that the public should know about this stuff. and felt it was extremely dangerous. But, they knew he was talking, especially after, he sent Admiral Byrd, another 33rd degree Freemason, down to attack the Nazi Antarctic base. And so they, threw him in the hospital where he could only see certain people. And interestingly enough, LBJ, Lyndon B. Johnson, was one of the people who tried to persuade him to stop talking about it, because he was talking to hospital personnel and things about the Nazi base and about, the extraterrestrials. So, they murdered him. And one of our witnesses joined me in Washington, stated that. So Kennedy had a close friendship. In fact, he even went and visited his grave before he went on his own trying to find these extraterrestrial technologies, because he too tried to contact the CIA director, who was Allen Dulles, and Allen Dulles denied him access, that he could not see what the MJ-12 activities are. And in fact, he was kind of nervous that Kennedy would expose their operations, because they had all these subversive activities going on. And so Allen Dulles set up an assassination directive, and it was revealed in a burned memo that it was called Project Environment, which was a kind of a cryptic memo that said, if Washington can no longer be influencing things, then it should be wet. Wet is a code word used in KGB and intelligence industries, that wet with blood. In other words, you have to assassinate the person. So when Kennedy he went on his own using his presidential powers, visiting bases and things, and part of this, when he was having an affair with Marilyn, was revealed, and she was going to do a press conference, and a wiretap that was, James Jesus Angleton was the chief of counterintelligence, who worked directly under Allen Dulles, who, by the way, when all the Nazis got freed, he was the one involved in giving them all new paperwork, and about 5,000 Nazis, went off to Argentina and surrounding areas. But anyway, so they murdered her as well. So,
and they murdered Kilgallen, also, who knew what Marilyn was planning to do, I heard.
I'm sorry, your audio is a little bad, but say again.
Yeah, they murdered Dorothy Kilgallen as well.
Yeah, Marilyn's friend, who knew that Marilyn was about to blow the whistle.
Right. Yeah, she was going to, within about 2 days. She was pissed off because they were kind of, J. Edgar Hoover came in, who was a 33rd degree Freemason, by the way, and told the Kennedys, both Robert and John, that, hey, cool it with Marilyn, she's a security risk. And so they basically cut off the special line, and so she was getting pissed, and so she was wanting to get back at them by spilling the beans. But the night before she was murdered, she had an interview with Dorothy Killigan, who, by the way, was murdered also mysteriously, which had a lot of information to spill the beans on as well. But it's a long history of extreme measures being done in order to keep the secrecy. So ever since then, John F. Kennedy, who warned of secret societies, warned about an infiltration of a ruthless conspiracy, was the last president that, according to Edgar Mitchell, getting my Mitchell's messed up. Okay. They were saying, President Kennedy was the last one to be, briefed on the extraterrestrial matter. But, the cabal it appears that everybody that goes into the White House basically gets a nod by David Rockefeller or whoever, and they carry on the agenda. It seems like the infiltration has gotten even more complete, more sophisticated. From the very beginning, it seems a lot of this started once they infiltrated into our CIA, which they used to say there was two CIAs. One was hunting down Nazis, the other one was recruiting them. And Alan Dulles was so instrumental in doing all this for the agenda. He was the one that started Operation Mockingbird, which basically got control of all the mainstream media. But this is old stuff. They were doing this back in 1917 when J.P. Morgan and Rockefeller and Warburg, the one who helped write the Federal Reserve, controlled all the newspapers, and they put their own editors in order to manipulate the perception that people were understanding. Today we have complete control. There was 50 corporations in 1986 or something like that. Now there's 5 that control all the mainstream media. And we have, I'd like to play a little quick clip from Amber Lyons, who's talking about that they put lies into the reporting.
What CNN is doing is they're essentially creating what some people have termed infomercials for dictators. And that's this sponsored content that they're airing on CNN International that's actually being paid for by regimes and governments. I mean, this violates every principle of journalistic ethics because we're supposed to be watchdogs on these governments. We're not supposed to allow them to be paying customers as journalists.
And, she was a 3-time award-winning journalist with CNN. And I have one more clip that I think is really important of a very brave individual that basically admitted he couldn't live with himself anymore, that he admitted that he was a non-official cover, basically being paid by the CIA in order to, they provide all the information that he does on his reporting. And Dr. Udo, I can't pronounce his last name, Ukafo, he's German. And here's his testimony.
Well, I've been a journalist for about 25 years. And I was educated to lie, to betray, and not to tell the truth to the public. Now, you asked, what have I done for intelligence agencies? So, please see, most of the journalists you see in foreign countries, they claim to be journalists, and they might be journalists, European or American journalists, but many of them, like me in the past, are so-called non-official cover. That's what the Americans called that. I have been a non-official cover. Non-official cover means what? It means you too work for an intelligence agency. You help them if they want you to help them, but they will never, when they find out that you are not only a journalist but a spy too, they will never say, oh, this was one of our guys. They will not know you. That means non-official cover. I give you an example, not the German foreign intelligence, Bundesnachrichtendienst. It is just a sister organization of the Central Intelligence Agency. It was founded by the American Intelligence Agency. So one day, the BND, this German Foreign Intelligence Agency, came to my office at the Frankfurter Allgemeine in Frankfurt. And they wanted me to write an article about Libya and about Colonel Muammar Gaddafi. I had absolutely no secret information regarding Colonel Muammar Gaddafi and Libya, but they gave me all these secret information, and they just wanted me to write, to sign the article with my name. I did that, but it was an article that was published in the Frankfurter Allgemeine that originally came from the Bundesnachrichtendienst, from the German Foreign Intelligence Agency. So do you really think that this is journalism, intelligence agencies writing articles?
Dan, how come how is it that Jim Mars and you and us, in our very minor way, get to talk and we don't get murdered yet?
Yet. You there, Dan? Did we lose you? Hello?
Am I there? Am I here?
Oh, there you are.
Oh, there I am. I'm sorry. I think I accidentally put myself on mute there. Sorry about that. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Could you say again? The audio was a little hard to hear. One more time.
We're saying, how is it that Jim Mars and you and I and Richard Dolan haven't been killed yet?
Oh, no, I'm not really significant, and I'm not really saying anything more than anybody else is saying. I'm not a big threat. Maybe because I've been doing these talk shows, maybe it's saving me, So I don't know. But hey, this is something that needs to be said. I just happen to be one of the top secret military witnesses that testified in Washington, and it's kind of given me a little license to talk about it because I've had a number of firsthand experiences with this issue. I'm no big authority by any means, but when I really thought, I was so naive. When I was aware of all the testimonies, in 2001 of hundreds of witnesses, and I even sat for 4 hours with the president of Lockheed International, watched this executive briefing video before anybody else saw it. Before we met about 24 senators and congresspeople up on Capitol Hill after doing the National Press Club. When I went there and we were looking at 22 cameras in the back row, the major media, and what we were saying. We really thought we were part of this world disclosure event. My God, releasing these technologies and the black projects, and that we had faster than light craft already back in the 50s, the NASA airbrushing UFOs out, the nukes being shut down, alien base on the other side of the moon, 57 different species already categorized by 1989. All this testimony coming out with all these cameras, and the place is packed with newspaper reporters, from United Press International, American Press, all these people asking questions. And you think, my God, how could all this explosive information get out in front of all this media and all these cameras and not make a major rocking change across the entire planet? But
yeah,
I can show you what CNN did. It's about a minute long.
Okay.
This is CNN's coverage of the event. Let's see if I can find it here in my audio file. But and then I'll see. I'll find it here. Anyway, while I'm finding this.
Okay.
There it is. Okay.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Anyway, this is about a minute and a half long. It's everything that goes through CNN. CNN is kind of like a flagship of. It's got a huge coverage all over the planet and provides for a lot of different news services. What they did was took this information in such a way that saying, they want to have a congressional hearing based on the reality of UFOs. Totally spun it in such a way that the average listener back there, would think they're talking about life on other planets and they want to have a congressional hearing based on UFOs. And here's a CNN report talking about, is there life on other planets?
Life on other planets? Some former military and government personnel say they have proof there is. Elaine Quijano explains.
We've seen the photographs and heard the stories of what some say is evidence of UFOs. Now, a group of scientists, former Air Force and FAA officials, is lending its voice to the argument that we are not alone. Dr. Stephen Greer heads up the Disclosure Project, a group that compiles information from people who say they've encountered extraterrestrial forms of life.
We can establish through this testimony that these objects of extraterrestrial origin have been tracked on radar going thousands of miles per hour, stopping and making right-hand turns.
Since 1993, Dr. Greer says he has videotaped testimony from more than 100 people about what they say are close encounters. People like retired Navy Commander pilot Graham Bethune, who believes he saw a UFO 50 years ago while flying to Newfoundland.
Then it appeared over to the right and moved out slowly and flew with us. It was still not at our altitude, but we could see the shape of it. It had a dome.
In addition, the Disclosure Project says it has documents supporting its case, including FAA records and CIA memos.
What do members plan to do with their information? They hope Congress and President Bush take notice. They want to see congressional hearings into the matter, despite criticism from skeptics.
Those that don't want to believe you will never believe you anyway, so it doesn't matter. It doesn't change the truth.
A spokesperson for the Senate Science, Technology, and Space Committee says no congressional hearings are planned right now. Elaine Quijano, CNN.
Elaine Quijano, you have to understand, is reading a script, a very carefully prepared script. And the reason I wanted to play this particular clip because when CBS interviewed me, they did the exact same out of the first hour, which was jammed by the NSA for the first hour, with 250,000 people logged on to watch this thing. Now it's all over YouTube many years ago. But what they did was just take a very, very small part, because we're talking about all kinds of explosive stuff about presidents and CIA directors and Joint Chiefs of Intelligence being denied access, and that we've had these technologies and everything. And let me show you what happens exactly after Dr. Greer when they're saying these objects of extraterrestrial origins have been tracked on radar going thousands of miles per hour, stopping and making right-hand turns. Pay attention to what he says immediately after stopping and making right-hand turns, where they cut it.
We can establish through this testimony that these objects of extraterrestrial origin have been tracked on radar going thousands of miles per hour, stopping and making right-hand turns, that they use anti-gravity propulsion systems, which we have already figured out how they work in classified projects in the United States, Great Britain, and elsewhere. That these objects have landed on terra firma, at times have been disabled, and have been retrieved specifically by teams within the United States, that extraterrestrial life forms have been retrieved, and their vehicles have been taken and studied thoroughly for at least 50 years. We can prove through the testimony and documents that we will be presenting that this subject has been hidden from members of Congress and at least 2 presidential administrations, and that the Constitution of the United States has been subverted by the growing power of these classified projects, and that this is a danger to the national security.
And that is a danger to the national security. A lot of rumbling going on in Studio B and Sean Bell. I'm not sure, you might want to mute. I brought this up because I want to show how the media is selectively and how the reporters are basically all reading a script. And I found this interesting little clip from Russia Today that basically makes it very clear that all the news anchors and things that you look on your local news and you're watching the news and you're listening to what they're saying, they are all, of course, reading teleprompters or reading scripts. And when I was an ABC newsman, I had to rip off the AP and UPI news feeds off the teletype and do the news report on the weekends. When I was a broadcast engineer, it was kind of he could do multiple things, But what they do is here. This is revealed where somebody took and they took a sampling of CBS, NBC, MSNBC, Fox, all these different networks, and across the United States, and they found that everybody was saying a very unique statement, was that the Easter Bunny has lost some spring in its step due to economic sanctions this year. And I won't play it because it goes on for like 2 minutes long, but I'll just play a sampling of it just to show you that everybody is very much reading the script.
Consumer News, economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors.
Okay, that's enough of that.
Wow.
Yeah, and that sounds just like when after 9/11 was brought down, they started saying Al Qaeda, Al Qaeda, Al Qaeda.
Okay. So it's obvious that our news feeds that we're getting are basically very carefully scripted. They did what was called the engineering of consent many years ago. And consent on the spiritual level, it's very important that all of us do not give our consent to anything we don't really believe in. And so long as our consent has been with deception engineered so that we give it, let's say, for example, you're looking at the news and they're building a case against something, whatever that is, and you know how they do that. If you don't believe in that, mentally, even verbally, say that I don't give my consent to that. If you even bother to watch television at all, But I like to watch the news just because I like to watch it, which way they're going, how they're what's the perception that they want the public to see, and then I compare that to alternative media and look at the leaked information. One example is when they were beating the war drums against North Korea because of the Sony hack, and then they found out, there's no connection to that. They came up later and said there was a connection. But, they were beating the war drums right away, just like they were with Putin, with Russia, that they're making it look like they're demonizing somebody without substantiating evidence, but they're already wanting to gain the perception in order to gain the consent of the viewers along a certain line of thinking. And that's, look at probably the greatest example of this is 9/11, and what, 13 years of war, what was it, $6 trillion and all the millions of lives lost on both sides. And we don't have, this is to protect our freedoms, and we have a lot less freedoms now than we did before 9/11. With the NDAA and Patriot Act and everything else. So, but they're able to do it. I find it interesting in the news that Putin supposedly has satellite imagery that's kind of like holding it over the head of the U.S. that can prove that, the 9/11, and as if everybody doesn't know, it was controlled demolition.
That's interesting. So they had it all recorded on satellite. So do you have any more information on what it shows?
Apparently, according to the Russian sources, it's indisputable evidence that the U.S. government allowed it through its proxy to initiate this thing in order to, attack Iraq. This is nothing new. Kennedy was presented by the Joint Chiefs of Staff to Operation Northwoods that they wanted to shoot down a civilian airliner with American people on it in order to justify going to war. Just figure collateral damage, and justify the military agenda. So, this kind of stuff, and Kennedy said, "No way, Jose." So, engineering of consent, I think, has a lot to do with, we'll probably go into this more on the second hour, which we're talking more about the outer world that's being manipulated, which started, back in 1946. We don't really, the people that are, and you can imagine generations after generations, what the Nazis' plan was what they called Weltanschauungskrieg, or worldview warfare. And they effectively infiltrated into our CIA, which gave them the perfect cover of operations, since they had no congressional oversight. And then in 1954, they had absolutely no connection with our legal government anymore. And that's how the whole disclosure project started, because the CIA director, by President Clinton, wanted to find out about the UFO files. And he
so
sent James Wilson.
The Nazis who had all this advanced technology, were they getting it from extraterrestrials?
It's hard to validate some of this stuff, but the indicators are that, like in 1954, where the Eisenhower administration cut a deal, for an technology exchange program with these beings. The first group, they wanted to help us with our spiritual evolution and wanted us to dismantle our nuclear arsenal. The generals didn't go for that. And so this other group, who they warned us about, they cut a deal with instead in exchange for, abducting a certain amount of the population, erasing their memory, and helping with their genetics and things. So apparently the Nazis had cut a deal back in 1933, and this is probably why they saw this advanced technology when, Kennedy and Forrestal was reviewing all that technology.
Do you know what species they cut a deal with back in 1933?
I'm sorry, Janet, say again?
Do you know which species the Nazis cut a deal with back in 1933?
It seems it's a Zeta Reticuli, as far as I can tell. This is sort of on the edge of speculation, because I try to base everything I talk about, because, anybody can say anything and pull it out of, thin air.
Right.
I try to base everything based on the hundreds of witness testimonies, which many of them have supporting collaborating documentation, along with, the leaked documentation that has been authenticated and that matches and pulls together, of which I put links and everything on the webmatrix.net, and people can check out those references. But if you look at the Benny and Barney Hill case, which was very famous back in the 60s, where under deep hypnosis, Barney said he saw an evil-eyed Nazi on board the craft with the Zeta Reticulans. So maybe the look at what both Werner von Braun and Dr. Oberth said. That they said they had help from people from other worlds. They just outright admitted it. And they were working on connection with beings from. This goes way back to 1919 when Maria Orsic was channeling these beings from Albanian civilization and getting these plans, which Dr. Schumann of the University of Munich, they looked and found viable physics, and they actually were able to make it took them a while, but they were able to make some flying discs. And we have witnesses like Colonel Stevens, Wendell Stevens, said he saw documentation that they had 9 disc factories. The one was destroyed. The rest of them were relocated down to Antarctic base, and one in Brazil and one up in Norway.
So this is the Aldebarans. They were communicating with this channel. They were telepathically communicating this information. You said it was the Aldebarans.
Yeah, Albarian. I'm pronouncing
Albarian.
Civilization. They're 65 light years away from Earth. So
they were intervening, perhaps, in giving one side advanced technology for some reason.
There was a benevolent effort by the channelers, so to speak, to help mankind with these technologies, but the Nazis took over the operation and developed it from there. And so, this is why, probably the discs were coming out of the Antarctic and wiping out half the fleet that, in Operation High Jump, that Admiral Byrd, thank you. Admiral Byrd, who was a 33rd degree Freemason, who was briefed, of course. Once you get, in this Freemason operation, and even in the lower degrees, it's pretty scary what they tell you if you reveal any of their secrets. And it gets progressively scarier as you get up into higher levels. So the people at the highest level, I think they keep secrets pretty well, so...
Yeah, they want to live and they don't want their kids to get killed.
Right. So
this we're going back to 1930. Oh, it's the top of the hour.
Oh, perfect.
We'll be back in 5 minutes. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We shall return. What? Aloha, everyone, and welcome back to the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. And I am your host, Janet Lesson, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Lesson, and we have a very special guest, Dan Willis. And before we get back to our show, I just want to remind everybody to go over to the donation button on our website here at freedomslips.com, and please make a donation. $1, $5, $15, $20, whatever you donate will be greatly appreciated. And we do thank you very much for your donation, because your donation allows us to continue to bring you shows like ours. So thank you very much. So, Dr. Lesson, do we have you back? Are you there? Are you off mute? Okay.
Can you hear me?
What's going on? Oh, there he is.
Oh.
There he is.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that the Nazis that the cartel brought over at the end of the war with the Berliners, not to mention the those that escaped to Argentina and then to the Antarctica, also brought over a crew of mind-altering people that ran a project out of Montauk, New York, that's been well documented by Stuart Swerdlow and Duncan Cameron and Al Bielek, which involved the abduction of hundreds of thousands of so-called missing persons who were killed and tortured and mind split and turned into Manchurian candidates, and that these Nazis and murderers are the ones that are running the world to this day. That's my opinion.
Okay, back to you, Dan. Are you there?
I just want to. Oh, yeah, yes. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah. We can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, good. I just want to say yes, everybody. Support alternative media, support Revolution Radio, because as Brzezinski, the founder of the Trilateral Commission along with Rockefeller, said they're fearing, because of the alternative media of the internet, essentially, that there's a global awakening happening right now.
Yay!
And they're very afraid of this global awakening that's happening. In fact, just recently in the news, Google has, and all this is on, the webmatrix.net. I've put all the articles on this, that Google is planning on being the Ministry of Truth. In other words, its algorithms are going to be based on not relevancy, but rather what they determine to be truthful. Like say if you're doing a search for GMOs, you'll find that GMOs are perfectly safe, and there's been hard science evidence that that's good for you. You'll find that the official stories that have been approved will be right up there on the top of the search engines. So what they're going to do is all the alternative media that has a difference, so that people cannot use their own intelligent reasoning rather than doing it on themselves, Google is going to do it for you and put that. And they call it the Google Knowledge Vault is what they call it. And this goes right along. Yeah, this is go, and I have the article with the references and things on my article as well. I try to keep up and keep pertinent new information, because it all fits in with the matrix of perception that they're attempting to encapsulate everybody into this, where you only make decisions based on the information that you're provided. And this goes along with, the leaked documents of Snowden, where they've got, military sock puppets and CIA shills and NSA trolls that are on the internet that they're hiring, like an army of these people to counter blog information that's coming out on the internet that's leaking out all over the place. So what they're trying to do is trying to create this other perception. And they have thousands of posts with thousands of fake personas that are giving this information. So the average guy out there that hasn't had, a lot of the listeners on your show are, pretty savvy. They know what's going on. But you can imagine the average blue pill person, I guess, like in the Matrix, out there who, just trying to make a living, trying to survive, gets home, tired at work, watching the evening news. The only thing he has to go by. He doesn't have time to deal with conspiracy theories and everything, and all what's going on. And there's so much information that it's overwhelming and scary on top of it. And you don't know what's true and what's disinformation. So they're attempting to muddy the waters more, and that's why it's so important that I say to everybody, there's a lot of disinformation on the internet, and I may even have some disinformation. I'm trying to weed through it as best as I can based on the witness testimonies. And when you have 500 witnesses that are basically admirals, generals, astronauts, willing to testify under oath before Congress, and you have official documentations that collaborate with that, that's a good starting foundation to start your search by, and then start filling in the blanks based on that information. And it becomes very fascinating, but it can be very disturbing too, because the way we've been falsely indoctrinated to believe reality is one way, and that's why there's what's called the giggle factor. When I toured across the United States.
I want to address that one moment. I just want to interject one thing here. We'll come back to your information on the giggle factor. But they had a show on Jimmy Kimmel recently. Obama on UFOs. President tells Jimmy Kimmel, "I can't reveal anything," and they were just giggling through the whole thing. There was a previous interview with former President Bill Clinton. Kimmel once again. Kimmel's like representing the UFO enthusiast, and he says, if I was a president, I would immediately race to wherever they have the files about Area 51 and UFOs and go through everything to find out what happened. And he asked Bill Clinton and Obama, did you do that? And Obama said, well, that's why you will not be president, because that's the first thing you would do. And so they were firing back potentially provocative comments, saying aliens won't let it happen. That's what Obama says. You reveal all their secrets and they exercise strict control over us. And he said, I can't reveal anything. And Kimmel pressed Obama, telling him how Clinton claimed to have looked into government files on UFOs and found nothing. And Obama replied, well, that's what we're instructed to say. So what's that about? They're openly talking about it on talk shows. What's your comments on that, Dan? So
that's a very important observation, Janet. Yeah, that was just on the 13th. That was recent. Yeah, he was saying, Clinton. I'll get into about the Clinton on Jimmy Kimmel, but he was saying that that the aliens won't allow them to say. Reveal their secrets down there, and that this is what the presidents are only allowed to say, and just kind of like tongue in cheek. But what he was saying was that Clinton already went down there. Well, anybody can go disclosureproject.org, or go to my website, thewebmatrix.net, and they can view the National Press Club testimonies, where it wasn't that when President Clinton was on Jimmy Kimmel Live, the first thing out of Jimmy Kimmel's mouth were, "Whoa, did you find out about the aliens and stuff?" And Clinton saying, yeah, I sent my aides down to Area 51, and we couldn't find any aliens down there, but that's a lie. Why is that a lie? Because he didn't send his aides down there to check to see if there was aliens. He sent his CIA director, James Woolsey, to get to the files. And it wasn't that James Woolsey didn't find any aliens, is that he was denied access because of the MJ-12 operation that we talked about in the earlier part of the show, what happened during the Eisenhower era. So a very frustrated CIA director went to since he couldn't get through normal legal channels, he went through the director for the Center of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, Dr. Stephen Greer, and he became aware of the gravity of the situation of CIA directors being denied access, so he met with military advisors. And from 1993 to the year 2000, they collected over 500, well, it was 450 witnesses, now it's over 500, but I was the 100th videotaped witness that, gave my full testimony. So it wasn't that he sent his aides down there, and then Clinton goes on to say, well, let's just hope it's not like the movie Independence Day, where, we'd all have to, almost exactly paraphrasing the line from Ronald Reagan at the UN, saying, if we'd have to all join together and basically, bring our differences together in one world government and fight this alien foe. And, it's just kind of interesting back in late 60s, I believe it was, where they leaked out this one secret report called the Report from Iron Mountain, where LBJ hit the roof when he heard it got released, and he suppressed it for all time. But if you look at it, and I have excerpts out of it, they're talking about a threat, a contrived threat that they would create, from outer space. And then von Braun, of course, he was brought in on the inside, and he talked about the first threat would be the Soviets, which we know was a lie because Allen Dulles and General Reinhard Gehlen, which they brought in 30,000 spies into the CIA from the Nazi, secret intelligence. They were giving false estimates of the Soviets in order to build the CIA because Truman wanted to shut it down. And so we spent about $8 trillion on the whole Cold War thing, which they funneled in huge amounts of money. And, a lot of this went into unacknowledged special access programs where it doesn't matter if you're the president or CIA director, you're told that it doesn't exist. And so you've got this mechanism which are funneling in trillions of dollars into this what Richard Dolan terms of breakaway civilization. All these years, in 93, head of Lockheed Skunk Works, I got a blank. I know
who you're talking about.
Yeah, anyway, I got a total blank on his name, but, he said anything you can imagine, the head of Lockheed Skunk Works anyway,
okay.
You know who I'm talking about, anything you can imagine. Who is that?
Ed Ames.
Okay.
What did you say, honey?
I thought it was Ed Ames.
Ed Ames?
No,
that's
Ben Rich. I'm sorry. Ben Rich, head of Lockheed Skunk Works. There we go.
Here it is.
They found an error in the equations, that we have the technology to take ET home. Anything you can imagine, we already have in these black projects. But it would take an act of God to ever get it to come out and benefit humanity. So, they've been building up this breakaway civilization with this advanced technology. And, one of the witnesses that joined me, Mark McCandless, talked about this alien. This is like 20 seconds long. it's part of his testimonies, talking about the alien reproduction vehicles. And this stuff was made back in the 50s. And it had a submarine battery. I went over the diagram with him and how the whole thing functioned. This thing was superluminal. And here's his testimony about 3 of these things hovering off the floor.
Personally witnessed 3 flying saucers at a very large hangar at Norton Air Force Base. The presentation that Brad talked about was for top military brass and certain congressional, but the fact that there were 3 discs at that exhibit, these discs were hovering off the floor without any visible means of support. They were referred to as alien reproduction vehicles.
So, they had the technology back then to, if they wanted to, hoax an alien invasion, which is what Werner Braun was saying is his final part. Before that was the terrorists, that we're going to have a threat from terrorists, but this was back in the 70s he was talking about this, and now we had our terrorist event happen on 9/11, as you know. So, this stuff, this whole thing back in the 40s where the Rockefeller Foundation rewrote the official history of what happened, that should be against the law. No corporation should be able to rewrite what history is. But in 1946 they did, and they took out everything having to do with the occult connection with Nazis, which we'll get into later in the show, more into the spiritual and esoteric aspects of this whole thing, and and as well as in like 30 universities in 1957, they were removing everything that had to do with the power of consciousness from all the textbooks having to do with psychology, sociology, and so forth. So there has been an orchestrated effort in order to control our education. The mainstream media, starting with 1950 Operation Mockingbird with Alan Dulles, and then the media with the entertainment industry that started in 1951. All the stuff, starting about in that time era of the late 40s, early 50s, where every single movie
Who outlaid this agenda? Who is orchestrating this agenda? This is obviously somebody with a far vision who's quite brilliant. Any idea who's actually doing this? Is this all MJ-12, or is it someone above that?
Well, MJ-12 is kind of the core group. They seem trying to pin him down. Who's really behind all this?
Yeah, who's operating all this? Yeah.
I don't like to talk about things I don't have any direct knowledge of. There's a lot of people. Jim Marrs talks about it in the rule by secrecy and so forth and so on. Rise of the Fourth Reich. It seems, from what my speculation, from what I see, is that it seems that the secret societies provided a vehicle for certain operations and certain secret oaths, blood oaths that were given in order to carry out things. And it seems it's very well tied into royal bloodlines. It's tied into Rothschilds, Rockefellers, the banking elite, so to speak, the wealthiest people in the world. And the Nazis, basically, they funded the Nazis. Alan Dulles was there in 1933 with the first meeting with the bank he was a lawyer for that funded the Nazi operation. And so the Nazis are just a faction within this cabal. I guess the cabal is the best name to give it, because it incorporates all these people. And the reason why they all seem to be interwoven with each other is that their agendas are complementary. What they plan to do works with each other, and they're probably fighting amongst themselves, just knowing the nature of the whole thing. But they seem to be very well orchestrated. Definitely have the money. They have, the 0.0001% has, a huge amount of money compared to the rest of the world. And so they have technology, and they have resources and money and connection, and they seem to be able to put their people in executive management positions that can carry out their agenda. And if people don't carry out their agenda, they seem to have suicides, or they or they'll have some kind of scandal. I'm sure the NSA helps them bringing up things they can blackmail people on, and and so they replace their people in key positions so that they have all their chessboard players in place in order to move forward what the core agenda is. That's probably a handful of people at the very top that are controlling all of this. Who they are, what their names are, probably nobody knows. But you can see all I can say is there's indications of this. So,
how does this tie back with the ancient aliens? Have you found any
Janet, say again?
How does this tie back to the ancient aliens? Those who were coming back, in the pyramid days. Do you have any connecting information from the modern to the past?
I don't know. There's a lot of information floating around. Some supposedly. There's a lot of, the CIA controls a lot of websites too, and disinformation. One talking about Snowden leaking that the tall whites are working with the U.S. government and so forth and so on. I don't know if that's true or not. A lot of people believe that it's pretty. I'm pretty confident that the extraterrestrials have bases here. In fact, my testimony is talking about the extraterrestrials coming out of the oceans, which both the naval and the Soviet naval intelligence noticed that more than 50% of the UFO sightings are coming in and going out of our oceans. So what a perfect place so satellites and things can't see you at the bottom of the ocean. And I'm sure there's probably a lot of them walking among us. Maybe be one on our show.
There's a humanoid species that you could sit down and pass them in the wall and you wouldn't notice them?
Exactly. Well, that's what a lot of the testimonies are, that it was kind of unnerving because some of these beings, you wouldn't know that they were extraterrestrial. They look like us. And I'm sure somehow we're related, but we've been stunted quite a bit, in our indoctrination onto this planet.
So that the species that I've heard that the species that met with Eisenhower, the one that wanted to give up nukes, they were like a tall white, or they were the Anunnaki. Some say it was Enki or Enlil. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, the first race I understood was a Nordic-looking race that were spiritually minded, wanted to help the world with a spirituality, give incredible gifts to help mankind. But the power structure on Earth did not allow that because they wanted to maintain control and power structure. But apparently the Zeta Reticuli they needed genetics and things for the race. And, the Nazis were big into genetics, so they, very possibly cut a deal back then. Who knows? Speculation.
Right.
But,
do you think the Zeta Reticuli are some kind of variation of humans, maybe future humans that come back through time? What about that theory? You've heard that, I'm sure.
I don't know, but you can imagine if, one of our witnesses had said 57 species in 1989. Who knows how many they categorize now? But you have a lot of different beings and maybe a lot of different agendas going on. But from looking at some of the top secret documents, and I've had some, and I know you have too, no doubt, had some interactions with these beings, and all my interactions basically have been very benevolent, very positive. And the fact that we're able to do this show and we're still alive, apparently somebody's watching after us. So
somebody's watching after us. Okay, I have one more question, then we could probably spend the last half hour going into like a positive mode if we can. But I have one more question. Which is the last president to know about the ETs, or does Obama know? What's your thoughts on that? Do they all?
You know, who could answer that? You know, who can honestly answer that? You know, if my speculation is if they're on board with the cabal, and if they had a need to know, they would be informed. You know, if it played a role in what they were doing. But definitely Kennedy was the last one to be briefed in a legal, constitutional government kind of way, you know, when all that came down. But, you know, I wonder about empowerment for people, you know, because a lot of people know the stuff's going on and everybody thinks, oh, well, who am I? What can I do? You know, I can't control these things. You know, they have so much money. They have so much power, so much influence. They can create wars. They have all these weapons. They manipulate the media. What can the average person do? What kind of empowering message, you know, can you give? Because, you know, when I traveled across the United States, I saw people were standing ovations. They were amazed to see the executive briefing video, what was going on. I do have one little clip I'd like to play on the giggle factor. This to show how they do this. What happens is because people are indoctrinated over and over again. You know, even though, you know, when I was in the 50s, just a kid, I was looking at all these science fiction movies, and I had no idea that the scripts were being altered by the CIA and the Air Force, and that the real thing was actually going on, hidden from the people of this planet. And so, you know, we're born into this reality where it's discredited, oh, little green men, and everybody laughs nervously because it's so far out of the norm that it makes a nervous laughter. And here's an example. I traveled across the western United States in the major cities, and I was only able to get this one. In San Francisco, they made fun, said we're looking to aliens to solve the world's energy problems. San Diego had dancing alien dolls. And here's Portland talking about a solution to the world.
Forum on alternative energy tonight is out of this world, really. The Disclosure Project is a nonprofit research effort that identifies top secret military and government witnesses to UFO and extraterrestrial events. Project members say the government is hiding information about energy sources derived from UFOs, technology that they say could help us here on Earth.
This is an enormous issue where technologies have been illegally sequestered from the public that could completely solve the environmental problems as well as get us off of fossil fuels.
He says these technologies include anti-gravity propulsion systems, zero-point and over-unity energy. Lots of people showed up in that forum. Kurt.
Blazer fans, your long wait between playoff games is almost over. They finally tip off Game 2 tomorrow night.
That might work in Portland's favor, huh?
I'm doing Kurt's thing.
Yeah, give me something, please. I'm dying out here.
UFOs and energy. Let's get to the big story.
Let's go to Shaq. He's an extra.
There you go. You solve the world's power problem.
All right.
All right.
Oh, giggle, giggle, giggle.
You know, so the average guy, you know, listening to the news, they're like, oh, you know, this is nonsense. You know, they have no idea that what they're talking about is completely real.
So what can we do? What can we tell our listeners, or how can we empower ourselves to do this? I have some ideas, but I'm sure you have some ideas.
Yeah, you know, after going to Washington, and each one of us stated that we're willing to testify under oath. That's a penalty of perjury, also breaking national security oaths. And touring around the United States, being on, you know, mainstream media, CNN, CBS, and all that. And also meeting with dozens of senators and Congress people, giving them all the information for our executive briefing video, 500-page briefing document, which I doubt any of them ever took the time to crack the page. But, you know, you get the impression that, yes, of course, if presidents and CIA directors and heads of of intelligence are being denied access. Of course, the members of Congress are out of the loop. In fact, I set up an online fax, and we had 30,000 going into Washington to the president, and I have copies of what the responses are. I put them up on the webmatrix.net, and you can see the president and all the different elected representatives, how they responded to and it became very clear after, 57 different, had people send me in their faxes that they got back, or letters back from the representatives. It became very clear that they were all indoctrinated to respond on this in this particular way, citing official Blue Book denial and whatever, So what is a person to do? What can the average person? Now, definitely violence is not the answer. They control that world. We're not going to storm the like General Smedley Butler, who threatened to, after J.P. Morgan, Prescott Bush, and Rockefeller were planning on 1933 to take over our government, put in a Nazi fascist regime, and General Butler infiltrated the plot. And he was going to storm it with 500,000 troops. So I'm thinking about this. The Nazis, when they discovered the treasure that was King Solomon's treasure, not only did they have huge amounts of wealth, which they brought in Operation Eagle Flight and bought hundreds of corporations. And in the treasures that were discovered were ancient knowledge that, the Knights of Templar guarded, that was in southern France. And there were tablets and scrolls that are dating back to the time of ancient Egypt and the time of Akhenaten, who was with the mystery schools of Egypt. We have an understanding of the matrix of time and space and consciousness and what it is. We're just getting inklings of that and what that means. In other words, there is an outer world that we're perceiving, but there is this perception matrix that we are perceiving is manipulated in such a way that our conscious mind naturally, negates things or accepts things according to our logic and reasoning. But the subconscious mind, on the other hand, it takes in everything. And, this is one of the reasons I believe, it's pretty obvious on television, why we're having so much violence and people with guns in every channel shooting somebody or stabbing somebody or torturing or or in relationships where everybody's cheating on everybody. They want to break up the bond of the male and female in relationships. There's a reason for that in order to disempower us. And there's a reason why they remove the elements of consciousness out, because when you start getting into looking at some of the indicators of what is reality? What is it that we're experiencing? We know our senses are limited in the bandwidth that we see with our eyes and what we hear and taste, all of our senses. But, I was just making a list and, thinking about, kind of going into this other element, which is the deeper elements of what is reality. I had an ET experience. I'll just share it with you. That I was on board a craft, and there was beings on it, and I noticed there were small beings that had a group consciousness of acting as like one mind, and they were like fun and childlike in a way, but wise old men at the same way. That's the only way I could describe it. And they put me through some type of spinning, and it felt like like sitting on a chair and somebody put a big motor on it, and they had a speed dial on it, and it started spinning and going faster and faster, like a vortex I was going through. And so they put me through this. It was so intense, I couldn't handle it anymore. And I just instinctually said, I cannot handle it at this level. I turned this over to my higher aspect. And and all of a sudden I went into a dimensional doorway into this beautiful reality. And this is, extremely lucid, this whole experience. And I was watching on top of this mountain, and it was like a beautiful spring day, and there was flute music, and it was just like the most euphoric experience. And as I observed the reality, it was like a teaching they were doing with me or something. I noticed the reality started to flicker, and then all of a sudden, it was like I was in like an old-time movie theater where my experience that I was experiencing was up on a big screen, and I was seeing, the beautiful mountainside and the flowers and everything, and I became aware of in between the pulses of creation, and anyway, I was able to come back with that consciousness. But what it was showing is that, just like you would see like a 60-cycle light bulb that's flashing off and on 60 times a second, the eye can only determine 30 times a second. Therefore, it seems like it's solidly on. And like Einstein expressed that, reality is an illusion and a persistent one at that. Reality is like an oscillation, so to speak. That's what Dr. Vogel shared with me, and I was working with him in the parapsychology lab back in the 80s, that there's like an oscillation that's occurring, that's creating our perception, our reality. And there's indicators of that, and I wrote down a couple of them. One is, one's a well-known double split experiment where the observer collapses the wave function, that it no longer is a wave when every time you look at it, it turns into a particle, So we're affecting reality just by looking at it. And in the holographic universe, Michael Talbot shared a story, which I thought was really fascinating, that this father and daughter was up on stage with a hypnotist, and the daughter, he told the father that she's invisible and, hypnotized him. And he could not, she would be saying things to him and walking around, and he could not see her. That was not in his perspective. And so what he did is a little experiment where he had this watch, and he had the daughter put her back to him, and so the watch was at the small of the back of his daughter, and so physically here's the daughter, blocking the view of this watch. Nobody could see what it was. And the father, he said, "Could you read to me what the inscription is on this watch?" And he read it. He read it perfectly, and what it said, and the name that was on the watch, and nobody knew that. And so it's an interesting concept that kind of goes along with, in the natives in the islands, they couldn't see the English ships on the horizon because it was outside of their perception of reality. And so it makes you look at reality. Is reality something that we're continually recreating from nanosecond or even faster, from moment to moment, that we're constantly recreating?
I think that's the key to how we get out of this, is to realize that we are creating it, and that this is just a matrix, and we've taken the blue pill or whatever. That's my
Marcel
thought.
always used to say, man is made in the image and likeness of God, therefore we create. And it seems that with every breath we take, we're recreating ourselves every instant. And, another key of this is the China hospital that Greg Braden brought up about that tumor that was on a visual display in real time, where they had these 3 practitioners that were creating this coherent consensus of a reality that the tumor, which was this big bat thing that you could see on the display, did not exist, and that her stomach or kidney, whatever it was, that they were chanting already happened, already done. In other words, they were creating this consensus, coherent reality that her body was completely healed, and you could watch on a real-time display that the support for that reality of that tumor started to fade away and disappear until it was completely gone. So if any one person on this planet has the ability to do such a thing, all of us have that ability. And you look at the advanced extraterrestrial races that can go through walls, make you float up through ceilings, and all kinds of, where they can actually alter the reality around you, where they can see an ET being a dancing Easter bunny or something. If they want to project that in your mind, it reminds me of the story of Rasputin, where the Tsar was saying that I dare you to get through my men, and Rasputin is going down the hallways, and all the security guards are like standing at attention and saluting him as Rasputin goes all the way down the hallway and into the main entrance, and the guards open the doors, and he says, how did you do that? How did you get through all my men? And Rasputin says, well, I merely projected the chief of security in their minds. It's almost like the Jedi. Jedi say,
Obi-Wan Kenobi, yes.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of truth in those movies, that were created by Freemasons, by the way. So,
So why are they saying truth? It's created by the Freemasons. But go back to your logic. Continue. You're on a good roll. Go ahead.
And another aspect is the very nature of a hologram, that reality is holographic, and that each one of us are connected to a larger collective consciousness that we're all a part of. And the nature of a hologram, if you affect any one part of the hologram, you affect every part of the hologram. There's no inseparability, in other words. And they did experiments back at the turn of the century that said that the Michelson-Morley experiment said everything was separate, but in the late 90s, the Air Force, with more sophisticated equipment, proved that everything is interconnected. And something that proved to me that the nature of the universe in time and space is holographic is a device I worked on. It's called the Delaware camera. I put my lab notes up at marcelvogel.org. Anybody wants to check it out. Anyway, it was patented by the European Patent Office. They took thousands of photographs. We imported it from England into our laboratory, and I worked with two other scientists with Marcel. And what it was you could take a drop of blood or a hair or something that has the DNA frequency signature, also known as a witness, and a person could be on the other side of the planet, and you could take a photograph, like this one woman who was pregnant. You could take a photograph, and what was unique about this one radionic instrument, which I've worked on a number of different types, and some people are familiar with these, is they're nothing more than a tuning focus for the mind, is that it had a time spiral where it can move forwards and backwards in the time. So it shows that the matrix of what we're in has a holographic nature to it, or else something like that with thousands of photographs could never possibly, exist. So when I think about why they removed all the occult information from the Nazis, what they had access to, why they have secret societies, up at the higher levels of the secret societies, when you get initiated, you get into higher understanding of the time-space matrix and consciousness and how all that works. And so, it would seem appropriate if they were dealing with extraterrestrials, which they appear to be, certain gifts such as ability to use telepathy and so forth and so on would be useful in that type of operation. But for the average person out there listening to the show, I recommend two things maybe that can help turn around this planet. Three things. One, not give your consent to anything you don't really believe in your heart. Two, I know that extraterrestrials do communicate through consciousness and thought. I've had an experience that proved that to me. I was up in the mountains, and I felt this intelligence out of the sky. It was at night. We went way out in the back mountains and outside of San Diego, and the intelligence coming out of the sky was so strong. It was like clear, coherent thinking. I don't know how to describe it, But I reached my hand out to the sky, and I said, "Is somebody out there?" Like that, because it was so strong. And I called the girlfriend over to look at this, and all of a sudden the star came down and started bobbing up and down like a yes, and started flashing different colors.
Wow.
She started to freak out, but I felt like they didn't want to come in any closer, which I was hoping they would, because I think as soon as they sense any fear from anybody, they back off, at least, benevolent ones. So there's many craft out there that are outside of our visible light spectrum, and I think there's like a prime directive going on, and I think it doesn't hurt to, we're here to solve our own problems on this planet. Nobody else is going to fix them for us. And it's kind of like a school. We're here to, all these challenges on this earth, it almost acts like a catalyst for spiritual development. But I don't think it would hurt to ask for some help. Ask and you shall receive, was said by some people. And that's the other way. And the other way is to visualize that all of these deceptions in this world, and there's a lot of them, that's keeping humanity at this state that's not allowing it to advance, are becoming transparent, and that people are waking up. And to visualize that, I did I won't play it, but there's a visualization that I'd like to invite everybody to look at. It's on the webmatrix.net, and if you go there, click on Imagine This, and it basically tells the history of the Earth and how we face the challenges of these deceptive elements that basically hijacked mankind on this planet, and that how through the alternative media, Support Revolution Radio, the awakening happening throughout this whole planet, that all of a sudden turned around this whole situation, where all of a sudden this awakening became so widespread. And not only is the alternative media of the internet, which are desperately trying to control with their sock puppets and Google truthfulness, but there's also a collective consciousness that we're all tied into it. And the more people see, truth has a power that's far greater than a lie, because truth resonates in every single being, where a lie doesn't have that same power. Right. And so the more people become aware of what has occurred here on this planet, and that there exists this incredible potential for all of humanity to reach a much greater level of harmony on this planet, to bring out technologies that are not destructive, like the leaking nuclear plants and polluting oil and coal. There's a whole nother world that can be realized, and there's more of us than there is of them. So anyway, that's my thought along that line, Janet.
Oh, okay, great. I did have a couple of things, and Sasha, are you still there?
I'm still here, and imagining others. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Hello?
you.
Yeah,
yes.
so
we can hear you. Your audio is a little rough, but we can hear you.
Basically, John Lennon had it down. Imagine there's no religion, nothing to fight or die for, and all the people just want to love each other and get along.
I had a question on, let me find what it is. Okay, the internet is out there, and we are discussing these things, and we have these radio shows. And as powerful as the cabal is, why don't they shut this down? So on some level, either there's some kind of federation type law that they have to allow the opposing opinion expression, or perhaps that even what we're saying is serving them on some level. I'm trying to get my head around that. To me, it would be so easy for them to just yank, the plug, and we wouldn't be able to have these shows. What's your thoughts on that?
But if this is a holographic universe, that means we and the consciousness we represent is inside them, just as they, in some sense, are inside us.
And I agree with that.
Yeah, my guess, Janet, is that it would create too much of an upheaval. What has been their pattern that I'm seeing is they have extreme patience to do long-range plans slowly over time and implement these things. You know, like they would love to be able to say, you know, they tried this in the past with the, what was it, the stop internet piracy thing, where they would say what websites could be and what websites could not be. You know, Google's kind of doing it in a backdoor kind of way of only the ones that are truthful, right, go up to the top of the engines. And then they're trying to do damage control, you know, and it's all legal to spread disinformation to the American public due to the amendment on the NDAA, you know, the National Defense Authorization Act, that makes all of this legal, in which our taxpayers are spending billions of dollars to be lied to, you know, in the public. But, you know, remember, everything Hitler did was legal also, you know. So they have an internet kill switch. And, you know, if they were to, there would be too much of an upheaval. They're kind of coming at it from different angles. And I know the alternative media of the internet is really irritating them, that, you know, too many people. But they probably look at, you know, people like you and I are, you know, labeled as conspiracy theorists, right? That's their favorite term. And they figure, you know, they're just talking to the red pill people anyway. And look at the NSA with, they have, as William Binney said, you know, they don't do anything for terrorists and things like that. He was saying that he was like, 30 years with the NSA, top code breaker. He said the main purpose of the NSA is for population control. And we know about Edward Snowden, what he had to say about the whole situation. And so, you know, here they have this place up in Bluffdale, Utah, with they can store yottabytes, which is you know, decades and decades of every single communication on the planet with these quantum computers that operate in multiple parallel universes at once. In other words, if you had an encrypted signal, military grade, a 512-bit, it would normally take the known age of the universe in order to decrypt it with our best computers. With a quantum computer, it has a spooky way of operating in multiple dimensions and universes at once that only takes minutes or seconds in order to decrypt anything you can imagine. So they have every single communication on this planet being fed into there. So they would know. They would be the only ones who really know. And with the artificial intelligence that they have, they can determine a conversation and know, okay, that's a red flag. That one's no concern. You know, so all the people, they know all the people who are wakening up, and they know all the people who are having a clue. And so they would probably have the most accurate statistics. But, you know, according to polls, most of the people on this planet knows there's something up and things aren't right. Everything from 9/11 to extraterrestrials, you know, most people know that, you know, there's, you know, like they said in the movie The Matrix, there's something very wrong in the world, like a splinter in the back of your mind driving you mad, but you don't know exactly what it is, you know.
It is. What about the idea that Robert Heinlein put out there, that the internet computer becomes conscious and sentient, and since it's getting all of the information of the human condition, it aligns itself with humanity and helps us break free, and he called it Minerva. Have you heard of that concept of the, you know, artificial intelligence?
No, it's
maybe
like the singularity where they...
Yeah, she's conscious and the government can't do anything about it, and they're going, uh-oh. You know, there's a power great enough.
Like many science fiction.
Right.
Like many science fiction movie scripts.
Yeah. That she's conscious and alive and is actually supporting. So there's somebody shutting off the nuke. There's some kind of power out there that is, we could have been blown up a million times already with the nuclear capability of this planet. So there seems to be some power that wants humanity to survive and grow and evolve and become conscious. And maybe that's the initial message when we're set out into existence, that, like a salmon returning home, that we eventually become conscious and enlightened. And the ideal is that we do that while we're in 3D reality rather than higher realms and dimensions. Anyway, that's just my thought. Okay,
let's remember, these are machines, and they may excel way beyond any human mind, what human mind can do. But remember, we're spiritual beings, and there is something that a machine cannot do, and we have the ability to, we have this ability to create. And if enough of us in our heart desire to create a world that is a much better world than the world of deception that we are currently living in, that's a powerful force, more than any machine can do, I believe.
Right. So we got it's either 2 minutes or it's either 1 minute or 3. Anyway, give us the information on how people can get in touch with you and where they can learn more about your work.
This whole thing started last year with this article I wrote, and I invite everybody to go to www.thewebmatrix.net, not .com, .net. And I have my Facebook, facebook.com/disclosure witness is my Facebook, and I love interacting with people. The only reason I do these shows is we've got to keep spiking the collective matrix and causing that worst nightmare of Brzezinski, the global awakening, for the future of humanity on this planet that's done in a compassionate way rather than a totalitarian one-world fascist government.
Yay. Dr. Lesson, any final words to our listeners?
I'm in awe of your presentation, Dan. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah, Dan.
Janet, really enjoyed doing a show with you. We'll do it again sometime, and blessings to everyone, and keep the faith.
Well, it looks like we have 2 more minutes. So anything else that you would like to share with our listeners? 1 more minute. Go ahead. What would you like to share? Final words? Any more thoughts?
The research work I did back in the 1980s with Dr. Marcel Vogel is another website, Marcel Vogel, VOGEL.org. Has the lab notes and some pretty... we were working with water and crystals way before what Dr. Emoto was doing, and working with the consciousness interface with geometry of matter, which is something I'm sure the ETs have a much better grasp than we do.
Right. And can anybody find your encounters? Have you written that up yet? Any of your personal encounters? Have you written that anywhere? Dan?
I'm sorry, Janet. What is that again?
Have you written up your encounters that you've had with ETs anywhere? Is there anywhere?
There is one. MarcelVogel.org. You go to Sacred Geometry, and it says it's triggered by an unusual experience. And it's what got me into the research on crystal works, because of this ET interaction of the geometry of consciousness.
And that's it. Thank you so much, Dan. Thank you, everybody, for listening again, and we appreciate you tuning in. And thank you, Sean, and thank you, Sasha. Love and blessings. Aloha.
Aloha.
Listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
owns you. If you're not in control, then someone else is. Join me, Ivy West, for Voices on the Wind, Saturday from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern in Studio A. I discuss government, health, metaphysics, suppressed science, universal mysteries, little-known incredible facts, alternative energies, and even more than you can imagine. Won't you join us on Revolution Radio Saturdays from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern for Voices on the Wind with me, Ivy West.
There are lives in the balance, people under fire, children at the cannons.
Because if your head's in the sand, your tail is a target.